Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's post-cabinet media briefing. Today I'm joined by my colleague, the Minister of Finance, who has some announcements to make. But before we get there, I have three announcements as well. Cabinet today agreed to the upgrade and expansion of the fishing port and facility at Moruga. Now, this decision is part of the vision for Moruga, and it includes an upgrade of the facilities and utilities for the Moruga area, constructing a new fishing port and facility, constructing parking facilities within walking distance of all the town services and amenities, creating a pedestrian-oriented environment around the commercial heart of the town, and building a waterfront at the end of Moruga Road. The first phase is the port facility, the fishing facility in Moruga. Cabinet also agreed today to the national consultation on education. The dates will be January 25th to 31st for the education survey. That will be followed by television and radio call-in programs from February 16th to 19th, and then two conferences, one in Tobago on February 22nd and the other in Trinidad on February 15th. Cabinet also agreed today to the funding of the schools carnival competitions, the Chutney Soca Monarch, the National Schools Soca Monarch, and the National Schools Junior Panorama. The budget for the schools carnival competition is 1.1 million, which is a slight decrease from last year's 1.3 million. So with those announcements, I'll now hand you over to the Minister of Finance for his announcements. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Coffey, and I'm looking for my operator. In the back there? Okay. I thought it was necessary since there is some confusion and misunderstanding with respect to the fiscal measures that this government has introduced since it came into office. I thought it was necessary to do an illustration. I've done it by way of a PowerPoint presentation. So can we go to the first slide, please? Second one. All right. I am not seeing it clearly. Is the media seeing this clearly? Can you read it? Okay. Now, this passed without much attention, that as of the 1st of December 2015, we increased the cap on persons who receive both the National Insurance Pension and the Senior Citizens Pension. The previous cap on these two benefits was $4,500. It is now $5,000. We have been told by the Ministry of Social Development that just over 27,000 pensioners have benefited from this increase. And what it means is that pensioners in receipt of both the National Insurance Pension and the Senior Citizen Pension are receiving increases of up to $6,000 per year or $500 per month. And I thought it was necessary to let you all know this in the context of, comments people have made about the adjustments to the VAT regime. Because here you have 27,000 pensioners who are now getting an additional $500 per month. And it's also one of our manifesto promises that we have already fulfilled. Next slide, please. All right. The next thing that is happening is that we've increased the personal income tax exemption limit from $60,000 a year to $72,000. What this means is that individuals earning a personal income of $6,000 or less per month are now exempted from pay as you earn from income tax and will not be required to file income tax returns. By the way, I've asked the Communications Ministry to print copies of this document to give it to you at the end of this presentation. Could I go to the next slide, please? Approximately 59,000 people fall in the bracket $5,000 per month to $6,000 per month. Previously, anybody earning $5,000 or less was exempt from tax, and we now have anybody earning $6,000 a month or less, which is benefiting 59,000 taxpayers. And when you take the total of persons who are in the 6,000 per month or less bracket, you get 302,000 persons are now exempted from paying tax on their incomes because their incomes fall below $6,000. And as an example, your typical taxpayer who earns $6,000 will now get an additional $210 per month in their pay packet in terms of additional income available to them. Could I go to the next slide, please? Done some comparisons here. So previously, somebody earning $6,000 a month, their PAYE or income tax per month would have been $210. Under the new system, which is effective the 1st of January, so it's effective for the year of income 2016, their tax is zero. Somebody earning $7,000 under the old system of a personal allowance of $60,000, their monthly tax would have been $455. It's now $205. And as you go along, we've done it up to $12,000. Somebody earning $8,000 a month, their monthly tax would have been $700 a month under the old system, but under the new system, effective January 1st this year, they only pay $450. So for these 59,000 persons, they are getting in excess of $200 additional in their pay packets every month because of the increase in the personal allowance. Let's move to the next slide, please. Now, this is the changes to the VAT schedule. We did a calculation, and I have provided it for you. You will get it printed. That we looked at households earning between $3,000 a month and $7,000 a month, and we did a calculation which shows us that they could spend as little as $50.86 more when purchasing food items using the new VAT system. And it's based on a survey done by the Central Statistical Office in November 2015, so it's very current, where the CSO surveyed 34% of households in Trinidad and Tobago and used the average price of food in 15 areas in Trinidad and Tobago, thereby creating a comprehensive basket of goods and prices. And based on this basket of goods, the following is a tabular representation of what is actually going to happen. Next slide, please. So we look at fish, for example, fresh fish. It is zero rated, so there will be no increase in price. We look at imported salt fish, that the November price was $29.62. That will now go up to $33.32. Sardines, currently $6.47, remain at $6.47. Full cream milk will go from $10.23 to $11.51, and so on. So we've actually looked at a complete basket of goods that persons would use. Actually, I was calling from the second slide. I'm sorry. Can you put it back up again? Let me see what they're looking at. Okay. So white bread, $6.64 in November 2015. The VAT adjusted price is also $6.64. Brown rice, $20.33 now, $20.33 when the new VAT system comes into place. White flour, $14.21, also $14.21 when the new system comes into place. So if you go through this, looked at bread, rice, flour, cornflakes, macaroni, cricks, pork, chicken, pigtail, corned beef, fresh fish, salt fish. Next slide, please. Canned sardines, full cream milk, condensed milk, evaporated milk, etc., powdered milk, cheddar cheese, eggs, margarine, oil. Next slide, please. Tomatoes, carrots, peas, potatoes, brown sugar, onions, baby formula, and so on. And if you go to the final slide, please. Soft drinks, orange juice, and so on. And the average expenditure of this target group is $777 per month as we speak, and we expect it to go up to $828 per month. So that's how we get the $50.86. It's not arbitrary, it's not by VAPs. But the point that needs to be made is whereas we've done an analysis of 1/3 of households in Trinidad and Tobago, and we've come up with an increase in their food bill of about $51 per month, I want to go back to what I said earlier. Pensioners are getting an increase in terms of the total amount available to them if they have NIS as well, $500, which is 10 times the increase in food prices with the new VAT system. And taxpayers are getting at least $200 more in disposable income every month, which is 4 times the projected increase in VAT. So the net effect of the increase in the personal allowance and the increase in the cap on pensions is that the additional disposable income available to pensioners and ordinary households and taxpayers is between 4 and 10 times the increase in price that we expect as a result of the changes to the VAT system. The critics are not noticing, or deliberately or otherwise, that we have increased the personal allowance and therefore people will get more money in their pocket, and that we've increased the cap on pensions. And I might add, if you go to the next slide, go again, right. There are a number of items on which duty is suspended, such as meat, salted fish, milk and cream. There's a whole series of things where the duty is now 0 on a number of items. So when you take into account the fact that duty has been suspended on a number of food items, you take into account the increase in the cap in pensions, you take into account the increase in personal allowance, you will see the net effect of the changes we have made is extremely positive, and people would in fact be far better off under these measures than they were before the new PNM government came into office. So I thought it was necessary to tell you this, and as I said, we're going to print this. So has it been printed, Mr. Reek? You could circulate it if it has already been printed. So you could actually look at the figures yourself, do your own analysis, and make your own comparisons. But I want to stress that nobody seems to be acknowledging that with the change in the personal allowance, persons will get at least $200 more per month in their pocket every month, and that pensioners who get NIS will also be getting an additional $500 per month, way in excess of any changes. So that's my purpose here today. I would answer a few questions on other matters. I'm sure you have other questions that you might want to ask me that have nothing to do with this.
We'll jump into the 6 minutes, but just on this issue, is your presence here today due to the fact that feels that people are just not understanding that there are benefits as you are describing them, because the impression is that people feel that in fact, since they are being taxed when they get paid, and now there's the zero rated, the change in the zero rated list, that it's more of an issue of us giving more money out of taxes, but the question, of course, of services, what are we getting in return for this?
I'm a little lost by your question, but the reason why I'm here today is that the increase in the cap on pensions went completely unnoticed. You know, I wouldn't want to think that this is so, that when you do something good, nobody says anything. And the increase in the personal allowance, which affects so many people, seems to be going unnoticed as well. So when you look at the effect of these measures, and then you look at the potential increase in the cost of food for a household, I thought it was necessary to point out that the combined effect of the measures is extremely positive, and people are much better off. So people need to understand this, that this PNM government has done this. It has put more money in the pockets of taxpayers, put more money in the pockets of pensioners, which more than offsets any small increase in the price of food. I just thought it was necessary because these things do not get the attention that they deserve, the good things that the government does.
What about the issue of the prices? Regard to, okay, so for example, in some places you're already seeing prices going up.
I haven't seen that.
I've seen that at least one place I've gone to where there was an item that cost maybe $15, it went up to $20.
Well, it couldn't possibly be as a result of any change in the VAT system because those changes come into effect on the 1st of February.
Hence the question, Minister, that there are those who may be seeking, business persons, who may be seeking to adjust their prices upwards, not related to the issue of VAT, but the economy overall. But we don't have we don't have price controls in Trinidad and Tobago, so that while you are making those points that you made just now, we still could be facing an issue of an increase in inflation and less disposable income.
Well, that could happen at any point in time. I would think in a recessionary period or a period of low growth, that there'd be a lot of competition and prices will be coming down because of more competition. If business people raise their prices, it's an opportunity for consumers to exercise choice. There's no reason for somebody to raise their price unless they believe that people will pay the higher price. But it has absolutely nothing to do with these measures because the new VAT system does not kick in for another week.
When the system does kick in,
Yes.
is the government looking at
All we can do, because we abolished price controls over 20 years ago, and there's no democracy that I am aware of that has a free market system where you have price controls. All the government can do is to highlight changes in prices and publish them, and embarrass people. Publish what the price was in January and publish what the price was of basic items in February. And the Consumer Affairs Division will be doing that, but so too will be the Ministry of Finance.
just on the issue of prices, oil and gas prices. The situation as it stands now, the budgeted price of oil, 45 US per barrel. We're seeing oil trading now below 30 US per barrel.
Yes.
Is it safe to say that in the mid-year review of the budget, there's a possibility of an adjustment downward in the price for oil and gas on which the budget is based?
Of course. If prices continue like this, you see, we use our estimates are based on what the experts tell us. We have a number of agencies around the world that predict oil prices. The International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the U.S. Energy Information Administration. There are a number of reputable agencies that do projections in terms of oil prices. And it is based on the work of these agencies that governments would use a particular price for their budgets. All of these agencies are adjusting their projections going forward in light of what's happening now. So by the time we get around to the mid-year review, we will use the information available to us at that time in terms of the projections of the IMF, the World Bank, the US EIA, and so on. and come up with an adjusted figure. But I want to point out, when the Prime Minister indicated that he had asked all ministries to do a 7% cut, that 7% cut, in my opinion, would be adequate to deal with any shortfall in revenue at current oil prices. That's about $3-4 billion in reduction in expenditure, and that should be adequate at this time. But you have to also understand the price is an average price for the year. For the first 3 quarters, the average was just over 40, about $40.60. Obviously, for this month, the average is below that. So for the first 6 months, you might come up with an average of maybe $35. So it's not the price you're seeing today. If you look at now, you might see $28 or $29 is today's price. But that's not the average price, because the revenue is based on an average price of $45 from October 1 to September 30th. So we keep reviewing it all the time.
And then what impact, from what you're indicating, that there could be an adjustment in price of oil and gas for the budget to reflect what is happening on the international markets? What impact that could have, let's say, for the third and fourth quarters of the government's financial year in the context of expenditure? We can have cuts that you did not expect when you deliver the budget in September.
No, well, the point I just made, let's say you get an average of $30 for the year, based on what happened in the first quarter, and then what you expect would happen in the third and fourth quarters, and what happened in the second quarter. You might average out at 30 or 35, whatever the number is. The current reduction in expenditure should manage that sort of price structure. It's only if oil goes to $10 or $15 or whatever it is, then you'll have to make further adjustments. One of the good things is that we didn't budget much for revenue from oil anyway, because the oil companies are doing a lot of investment in exploration and drilling and so on, and they're allowed, under some fiscal incentives that were put in place, tax concessions were put in place in 2014, they're now allowed to write off their capital expenditure much faster than they could before. Previously, an oil company might need to write off capital expenditure over a 3 to 4 year period. Now they can write it off in 1 to 2 years. So BP, for example, has said they're going to spend over $1.5 billion US in capital expenditure in this year, 2016. And when you take that amount of capital expenditure and you put it against revenue, we weren't expecting to get any huge amount of money from BP. We're holding talks with them, and we're looking for ways and means, because we're not comfortable, so we want as much tax revenue as we can get out of them. But in doing the national budget, I did not budget for a large sum of money from the oil companies. For 2 reasons: because the price of oil was depressed, and also because I knew all of these companies are doing significant capital works in 2016, which they would write off against their tax liability, and therefore their tax liability would be much less than it would have been 3 or 4 years ago. Okay?
Minister, a couple different areas. Some people, we noticed that...
And excuse me, where are you from?
Sasha Hariyan from Newsday.
Newsday,
I'm
okay.
asking, I noticed that Crix is one of the items that will no longer be zero rated.
Yes.
And for a lot of people in this country, it's considered to them a basic food item. Why put Crix back on the list?
On the list of what?
It's no longer going to be zero rated according to the slide.
All
that
right.
showed us.
Now, there's a basic misconception that the value-added tax system should be an instrument of social policy. It is not. It is simply a tax collection measure. And when it was introduced by the NER in 1989 or 1990, whenever they introduced it, they had a very small and tight list of exempt items. We're trying to go back to that. We're trying to make that as efficient as possible. As I said in Parliament the other day, an argument can be made for anything. I was asked to consider exempting Morbi from VAT because it's a favorite, drink. I was asked to exempt Crix because a cultural thing. So you can make an argument for anything. I've been asked to look at books because, it's educational. I've been asked to look at computers. a compelling and strong argument can be made from a social perspective to exempt VAT from virtually any product. But that's not the purpose of the VAT system. The VAT system is simply there to collect revenue, and it's supposed to be a strong and robust revenue collection mechanism because it has to counterbalance the general lowering of income tax rates and the increases in personal allowance over the years. We used to have tax rates in Trinidad and Tobago, but I remember when I first was employed, yes, mine. I remember when I was first employed, I was in the 70% bracket. Though, you know, used to have sliding scales of tax in those days. As you earn more, you know, your tax goes up 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, and so on. Well, that has long gone out the window. But the tax then went down to 40%, 35%. I was in 2006, under the former PNM administration, and Mr. Manning was Prime Minister, that we had a uniform tax rate of 25%, very low tax rate compared to many other countries in the world. And then the personal allowance was increased from $24,000, $2,000 a month, to $60,000, $5,000 a month. So you had this significant drop in the rate of income tax and a significant increase in the personal allowance. So whenever you're in a country and a government, you're doing that. You're lowering personal income tax, corporation tax, and so on, increasing allowances so that the actual disposable income of the individual after tax is much higher. You're going to lose revenue. So you have to counterbalance that with a consumption tax or a sale tax and make it as strong and robust as possible. So the purpose of VAT, as I said, is not for social engineering. It's simply to collect revenue to counteract for the loss of revenue from the lowering of income tax rates. Look at what we've done. We've increased the personal allowance again, yet again. That's putting more disposable income in the hands of taxpayers. So we have to keep that VAT system tight. And our policy is to take the money that we earn from taxation and target it to underprivileged groups or people in need. So we feel it's a much more efficient way of doing things. Try to have as few exemptions as possible. Try and earn as much tax revenue as you can and use that to pay for your social programs. You have to understand as well, a lot of people don't pay income tax at all. People don't pay corporation tax. They was declaring a loss. They don't declare the income. So a consumption tax like value-added tax, again, is a way of gathering tax from people who avoid tax elsewhere in the corporate sector and so on. So our policy is to have as few exemptions as possible and to make the value-added tax system as robust and strong as possible and take the revenue collected from VAT and use it to support our social programs. Okay?
Minister, a month ago when I was here, I asked Mr. Cuffey if government was considering reducing salaries of MPs and ministers to help with the budget shortfall. He said he would take it back to Cabinet for consideration. Has this been discussed at Cabinet? Is it being considered to help meet the budget shortfall?
Well, we effectively have a 5% cut in our salaries. Are you not aware?
Well, that is more towards the charities of the ministers.
It's still a cut.
Well,
it is. I'm losing 5% of my salary this month. That's a fact. And it's going to NGOs, sporting organizations, and charities who would otherwise come to the government for assistance. So we are cutting our salaries, and we are giving it to these charitable organizations, thereby reducing their demand on the Treasury.
Is a system being put in place to make sure that these charities don't approach various ministers who may not be communicating and then getting multiple?
Well, no, there are no restrictions on it. It would have become too cumbersome. It just has to be properly registered organization that's reputable. And, you know, so you more or less can be assured the money will go to the purpose intended. And it will be different from month to month and from minister to minister. We're not putting any those sort of controls in, you know, at that level.
I thought you would be happy that we took up your suggestion.
He's saying he thought that she would be happy that we agreed to cut our salaries by 5%. Yes.
saw that before the increase in VAT, the price of the goods would have been $7.77.
Yeah, it's just an example, eh?
Right. But is that figure really realistic? Because most families may not spend that amount in goods. They normally go more. And with the increase in taxes also on books and the 15% increase on gas price, super gas, is it really fair to say then that they are getting an increase of over $200 in their salary with the income tax? But with all the other increases, isn't it just basically breaking even?
No. How did you do that calculation?
Because the average family, I personally don't think that they would spend $828 on goods.
This is a average household that is earning somewhere between $3,000 a month and $7,000 a month. It's a household, okay? It represents 1/3 of all households in Trinidad and Tobago. Obviously, households that earn more than $7,000 a month might have one or two wage earners. Each one of those wage earners will benefit from the increase in the personal allowance. So if our household earning, say, $10,000 a month, $12,000 a month, they would not be getting simply the additional $200. They get $400 because they have two wage earners in that family. So that you have to do the calculations properly. If you're saying a household earning $12,000 a month would spend more than $700 on food, you might be absolutely right. It might be $1,500 a month they might spend on food. And therefore the increase for them might not be $50. It might be $120. Let's just use the numbers that I have here. But the increase in their take home is now $420. So you're always ahead, way ahead of the game with these changes.
Yeah, I understand that, but it's not just food items that the VAT has gone up on again. There are things like books and the super gas for that was announced in the budget.
Mhm.
So when you add up all of those things,
No, but how have you done a calculation?
well, myself, yes.
And what did you get?
And it is less than I actually spend more than the amount that I'm getting back from my salary.
Could you share that with me?
Well, I have it all written down.
Could you share with me and show me that the increase in the personal allowance and the increase in the certain items in VAT has resulted in a net loss to you? I'd be happy to see those calculations and we'll talk. But in the absence of data, I have to go, this is scientific. These are actual food items using a household survey done by the Central Statistical Office in 15 areas of Trinidad and Tobago, using the census data in terms of household incomes and applying a formula and looking at the actual increase in price. This is scientific. If you have done a scientific analysis, please share it with me.
But I'm speaking on a personal level and from what I've been hearing other people speak about. Being out in the news that here from.
No, but I want to give you an example. When I went to Parliament to talk about the changes in the VAT regime, the next day there was an article in a daily newspaper where persons were calculating that they spend $800 a month, $800 a week in food, and now they'll be spending $1,100 a month, a week in food. Now, that's an increase of 300 on a base of 800. So that's 40%. The maximum increase it could possibly be would be 12.5%. And that would be assuming that none of the items that they purchased prior were exempt from VAT. So they purchased no basic food items whatsoever. So the most that person's food bill could have gone up by is 12.5% of $800, which is $100. But I was seeing calculations in the papers, talking to people saying, oh, they will now have to spend $300 or $400 a week extra. It's unscientific. So what I would ask you is do the actual calculations. Do the calculations for yourself and share them with me, and we'll be most happy to look at it. Okay?
Good day, Minister. Donnie Sudruno from TT.
From where?
Loop TT.
Okay.
In your presentation, you said that the increase to the bill due to VAT would be as low as $50.
Yeah, this is the calculation we've actually done. And this is
Yeah.
what you've got.
Right. So as low as $50, that suggests that it can go higher than that. So,
Well, obviously, if you spend more, it would be higher.
right. Any idea as to how much higher?
Well, this is, as I said, this is 1/3 of the population. So this is a lower 1/3 of the population. Obviously, you'd have people in the middle 1/3 and people in the upper 1/3. But the increase we got here was of the order of 6.8%. When you take items that were subject to 15% VAT before, they're now subject to 12.5% VAT. Items that were exempt before, many of them are still exempt. So when you do the calculation based on a reduction in the rate of VAT from 15 to 12.5%, and you take into account the number of items, all unprocessed food, for example, everything in the market, all vegetables, provisions, fresh meat, chicken, fish, everything you would buy in any market is still exempt from VAT. Milk is still exempt from VAT. Flour, bread, cheese, still exempt from VAT. So when you take the net effect of the items that previously were exempt and are still exempt now, previously were exempt and are now subject to 12.5%, and previously were subject to 15% VAT, now 12.5%, we got a net increase of 6.8%. And so let's round it off at 7, and let's say, let's assume your bill was $2,000 a month in food. Multiply that by 7, you would get an increase of $140. So that's, and really recognizing that somebody that would spend $2,000 a month in food is somebody in the middle income bracket. I'll just give you an example. And even that person, that family that's spending $2,000 a month in food would certainly have 2 wage earners in it, would get back over $400 in the disposable income because of the increase in the personal allowance. You're still ahead. Okay?
Regarding the 5% cut in salaries, have you identified any charity?
Me personally?
Yes.
Well, in my constituency, I'll be giving it to the St. Vincent de Paul. But that's just for this month, because we're allowed to change the charity every month. And it can be a sporting organization, NGO that's involved in community work, or a charitable organization. So for me, I'm giving it to the local branch of St. Vincent de Paul in my constituency just for this month, January. But I may give it to somebody else, another similar group in February and so on.
Strictly one organization?
No, well, you can split it up, but then it becomes kind of meaningless. If you give it to 10, the amount that you would give them would be small. So let's say I give St. Vincent de Paul this month, I might give the entire 5% to another organization next month.
Would you care to share with us what 5% of your salary is?
$2,000.
Concerning the TT dollar, is there any plan to depreciate it, or has it been depreciated?
Not at this time.
And one more question to Minister Tuppy. We've heard reports of GISL employees not having been paid this month due to the allocation not being received on their part.
No, they did receive the allocation. It's an internal issue which we have resolved, and they should be paid by the end of the month. It was just simply a processing issue.
That's it?
I have a question related to the VAT issue. What about those who fall under that middle income bracket? Has the government taken that into consideration, those who may not be middle income earners, and the impact of this on them?
Well, certainly pensioners, 27,000 pensioners, are getting an extra $500 a month. That will more than compensate any increase in VAT. As I said, the money that we earn from tax, we're going to use it to target the low-income groups. So that's how we're going to do it. So if there are people who may be disadvantaged because of these changes, you can help them through one of the cash support card, commonly known as a food card, you could help a family like that. So that's what we're going to use the tax revenue for, to target the vulnerable groups.
And also the issue of the economy generally. We heard from at least one member in the opposition, and we hear from others in the contracting sector that they have had to, like some contractors have had to cut staff because they're waiting on payments. They're also new.
Well, there's a lot of overhang from last year. And every day we're discovering more and more contracts that were entered into, and more debts that are piling up, and more payments that are due. And it will require a debt management strategy on the part of the Ministry of Finance. It's running into the billions, I can tell you. Every day we hear about some other contract that was entered into on the eve of the general election, and contractual obligations entered into in the hundreds of millions. And as I said, when you take the aggregate, it's running into the billions of dollars. It's a, I don't want to call it a gift, but it's something we have received from the past administration. They didn't pay the bills. And a lot of unpaid bills outside there now, which we have to pay. It's difficult. I'll have to raise some money through a bond issue or otherwise to sort out these debts. And you realize when you sort out these debts, you don't do any new work. So it's quite a challenge for us. So to just spend billions of dollars settling debts incurred by the previous administration doesn't add any value to the economy in 2016. So the challenge is to manage these debts and also stimulate new construction. I can assure you we will be stimulating new construction from this month going on. I've managed to arrange some funds to get some construction going, new construction.
You had mentioned that was a part of the strategy to deal with the $5 billion back pay, the back pay owed.
Well, that's not my strategy. That was a strategy that I saw in the newspapers. It didn't come from the government. But those are always options. But anything like that would be voluntary.
Could you give us an update in terms of how that issue of making those payments to the public servants and the members of the protected?
No, well, we will be paying the arrears before the end of fiscal 2016, long before. I plan to pay it long before. We're out there in the banking sector right now, determining how much money is available, what it will cost, but we will be borrowing to pay the arrears, because we simply don't have the cash. But that will be done long before September 2016. I don't want to give a precise date at this time, but I would say within a month or two I'll be able to give a precise date as to exactly when we will be settling the arrears.
What those ministers who would say, for example, deal with the protective services first because they secure us and keep us safe, and then maybe deal with other aspects of the state sector.
And what about the health sector workers? They keep us well. You can't adopt that approach. You got to pay everybody. So we're not going to pick and choose and cherry pick between, entities to pay arrears. We have to pay all. Okay? And it will be done well before the end of the fiscal year. Okay?
I have a question for you, Minister.
Sure.
When I, at the energy conference, with the Prime Minister's address, with the Energy Minister's address, but we didn't really hear any sense of incentives for upstream companies.
Oh, if you had listened to the speech by the president of BHP Billington, Mr. Pereira, he referred to something I said in the budget, is that we're going to use the UK model. In United Kingdom, the government very unwisely raised taxes on the oil companies in and around 2012, sometime like that. And the oil companies reacted by shutting down the operations. They found the taxes oppressive. And British government lost billions of pounds in taxes. So they recognized after a couple of years that they had made a big mistake. So the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the equivalent of the finance minister, issued what is called a call for evidence. It's really just a request for proposals, really, from the sector in terms of how they could reform their oil and gas taxation regime. And then they had a lot of dialogue, and they implemented the recommendations coming out of that consultation. And they're back on stream. And I did mention in the budget address that I intend to do exactly the same thing, and I will be doing that within the next month. I will be making a call for submissions from the energy sector. Let them tell us what they think we should do about incentives and the taxation system in order to encourage, as much investment in exploration and drilling and production that we could possibly encourage. So that will be happening in February. Okay? Thank you. Which radio?
Heritage Radio.
Oh, Heritage, okay.
Youth Scandalers have been saying that they were not consulted.
Pardon?
They were not consulted.
No, who is not consulted?
Youth Scandalers.
Oh, used car dealers, okay. Well, I think you better pose that question to the Minister of Trade. I am not competent to answer that question. I could try. Ask the question.
Why they were not consulted?
Well, you see, I can't say. I rather suspect the Minister of Trade did enter into consultations, but that's really a matter you should pose to the Minister of Trade, because that policy is set by that ministry.
I have a question for Minister Coffey. The president of the Malice board, decided there's been some sort of a delay in that issue. Could you give us a sense of what's happening there?
It's not a delay really. When the board is announced, there are procedures that they need to go through. The appointment will be made by the president. The president has to check on all the people who are appointed, make sure they meet all the criteria that are set for the board. In that particular board, we have special skills for each member. So it's just going through the normal process, and then they'll receive their letters of appointment.
You have many last questions.
Yes,
Okay, is this the last?
this will be the last.
All right.
When you look at the mid-year review of the budget,
Uh-huh.
would you be revisiting the issue of the VAT regime, or that will stand for the rest of the financial year?
I might reduce the exemptions further. I may reduce the exemptions further. Because what we really want to do is to keep lowering the rate of tax and try and have as few exemptions as possible, but as low a rate of tax as possible. Maybe even go to a general sales tax, like they have in the United States, 9% or something like that. So the intention is to simplify the system, because exemptions create avenues for cheating, because people could mislabel. Because right now, wheat flour is exempt from VAT, and we've kept it so. And I've had a question come to me, what about baker's flour? Well, I don't even know what baker's flour is. Is it totally comprised of wheat? I don't know. So someone could mislabel an item. You might have an item that is not wheat flour, but they label it as wheat flour, and they escape having to pay VAT. But the less exemptions you have, the less avenues you have for that sort of cheating and tax evasion. That's what weakens a tax collection system, when you have so many loopholes and so many areas and avenues where people can avoid paying tax. So our intention is to keep looking as to whether we can continue to lower the rate of tax, but with virtually no exemptions at all. Okay? All right.
Okay, thank you all very much for coming, and see you all next week around the same time. Thank you.